Some people are not lost because they have no direction. They feel lost because almost everything in their life has become a response to something else. A response to pressure, deadlines, messages, bills, moods, expectations, and the next small problem that suddenly needs attention. The day continues, and from the outside it may look ordinary enough. But inwardly, it does not feel authored. It feels like a long chain of replies. You wake up, and before you have had time to hear yourself, the world has already started speaking. There are things to check, answer, remember, fix, and manage. Your attention gets pulled outward before it ever has a chance to settle inward. Not because you clearly chose that direction, but because something asked for it first. That is how a reactive life often begins. Not through one dramatic collapse, but through repeated interruption that slowly becomes normal. At first, it seems harmless. You handle one thing, then another, and you tell yourself this is simply what life requires. Over time, responding becomes more than a habit. It becomes the way your whole life starts to take shape. Instead of deciding what the day is for, you spend the day negotiating with whatever arrives. Instead of moving from intention, you move from pressure, and pressure is almost always louder than desire. This often happens to responsible people first. Unstructured time, not because they dislike peace, but because open time brings them into contact with what has been buried beneath all the answering. When no one is asking and nothing is urgent, a deeper question begins to surface. What would I do if I were not only reacting? That question sounds simple, but for some people it feels almost destabilizing. They realize they have become very skilled at answering life, but much less practiced at initiating it. They know how to adapt, adjust, and keep things moving when circumstances become difficult. But beginning from themselves feels harder. Choosing before pressure arrives feels unfamiliar, almost exposed. This is not a character flaw. It is often a learned survival posture that once made sense. If you grew up around unpredictability, tension, criticism, or emotional inconsistency, you may have learned to read the room before reading yourself. You may have learned that safety came from noticing shifts quickly. A tone changed, and you adjusted, a mood moved, and you became careful. A problem appeared, and you learned to be useful before anyone had to ask directly. Over time, the signals around you became louder than the signal within you. Not because you had no self, but because the environment trained you to prioritize response. When response becomes the way you stay safe, it can follow you into adulthood. The room may be different, but the pattern remains. You still scan, anticipate, and move quickly toward whatever seems most pressing, even when the actual threat is small. You may call it responsibility, realism, or staying prepared. But underneath those names, the body may still be trying to prevent consequences. It may still believe that if you pause too long, something will slip. Someone may be disappointed, a problem may grow, or a version of stability may be lost. So you keep moving, but movement is not the same as direction. A person can move constantly and still not be led by anything deep. They can be busy without being guided, productive without feeling aligned, and active without participating in the authorship of their own life. That is one of the quiet losses of living reactively. The self becomes efficient, but less present. It becomes quick, but less known. It becomes capable of handling life, but less able to recognize what it would have chosen freely. Over time, that can create a hollow feeling. Not empty exactly, but crowded with the wrong things. Crowded with errands, expectations, unfinished replies, inherited fears, old obligations, and the emotional residue of other people's needs. There may be no room left for the slower voice inside you, the voice that does not shout. The voice that says, "This matters to me." The voice that says, "I do not want to keep living from immediate pressure." The voice that says, "I need to choose before the day chooses for me." That voice often returns quietly, not dramatically. It may show up as irritation at things you used to tolerate. It may show up as boredom with a life that looks acceptable but feels indirect. It may show up as grief when you realize how much time has been spent in answer mode. It may show up as a longing for something cleaner, simpler, and more deliberately yours. That longing matters. It is not selfish, childish, or irresponsible. It may be the part of you that is tired of living as an echo. An echo of demands, old fears, other people's timelines, and unresolved pressure. A human life cannot feel whole if it is only an echo. At some point, there has to be a first note. Something that begins in you before it is requested from you. Something you protect before it becomes convenient. Something you choose before urgency has the chance to crowd it out. This is where people often misunderstand change. They think becoming less reactive means becoming careless, detached, or unavailable. It does not. It means becoming less available to false urgency. It means learning the difference between what is important and what is merely loud. It means realizing that not every demand deserves the power to organize your day. That distinction can change the shape of a life, because when everything feels urgent, nothing can be chosen with depth. Urgency compresses the mind. It narrows perception and makes the nearest pressure look like the highest truth. But the nearest pressure is not always the highest truth. Sometimes it is just the nearest pressure. If you keep letting the nearest pressure decide everything, your life will keep reflecting interruption more than intention. That is why a reactive life often feels scattered. Not because the person has no values, but because their values rarely get the first word. Their values wait while the day negotiates with noise. Their values wait while expectations take the front seat. Their values wait while the mind handles the next little fire. By the end of the day, there is often no energy left for the deeper life. So the person says, I will get back to what matters tomorrow. But tomorrow arrives with its own interruptions. This is how people can lose years without making a clear decision to abandon themselves. They simply keep answering the wrong things first. They keep treating their own life as something that can be returned to after everything else has been addressed. But everything else is endless. There will always be a message, a bill, a request, a complication, or a small piece of friction asking to be handled. If your inner life only receives attention after all of that is finished, it may never receive attention at all. So the question becomes more serious. What gets the first claim on you? Not what you say matters, and not what you hope matters. What actually receives your cleanest attention, your best energy, and your most protected time? That question can be revealing, because many people discover that their most valuable attention has been given to whatever is most immediate, not whatever is most meaningful. And that is not because they are shallow. It is because immediacy has trained them. Modern life is very good at turning people into responders. Notifications, deadlines, feeds, tasks, bills, and constant accessibility all teach the same lesson. Be available. Be reachable. Be ready. Be quick. Be updated. Be responsive. But a responsive person is not always a free person. Sometimes responsiveness becomes another word for living without a gate. Everything enters. Everything interrupts. Everything has permission to redirect the mind. Without a gate, the self becomes porous in a painful way. Not open, but too easily entered by urgency. That is why less reaction often requires more boundary. Not dramatic boundary, and not harshness. A quieter boundary is often enough to begin, a moment before answering, a pause before agreeing, a morning before the phone, a question before the automatic yes. These moments may look minor, but they interrupt the reflex. And interrupting the reflex is where authorship returns. Authorship does not always begin with a grand life plan. Sometimes it begins with the smallest possible pause. A breath where there used to be immediate compliance. A question where there used to be automatic motion. A decision to let your values speak before your fear starts negotiating. That pause is not empty. It is the doorway between stimulus and life. Without it, you only answer. With it, you can choose. A less reactive life does not ignore reality. It answers reality from a clearer place. You still respond, but response is no longer the entire identity. You still adapt, but adaptation no longer erases the person adapting. If your life has felt like one long reaction, begin by recovering the pause, because sometimes the pause is where your real life starts speaking again. Thank you, and stay calm.